not sure if Maurice really understood what he was asking us to do when he asked us to talk about the cost of quality as applied to food. Covering that full scope of the term in 18 minutes is quite a task, but we think we're up for it.
So before we start, we think we should describe ourselves in the form of a disclaimer. We aren't food chemists, biologists, doctors, or nutritionists. We are, however, experts in our own experience in the food system we all share.
We migrated out of corporate America. We are small farm immigrants without an agricultural background who decided we wanted to raise bison for meat.
Some of you may know us from the farmers market, where we've sold our meat for the last 10 years.
The way you may not know is the subject we're going to talk about, which is the cost of quality as it relates to the meat industry. First, a little bit more about us.
So for over 30 years, Ken has worked in quality and reliability for industries such as computers, medical devices, industrial robotics. He's helped many achieve ISO 9000 registration and is familiar with HACCP regulations.
Kathy has over 30 years of experience in administration, sales, marketing, and investor relations. She also wrote a book called Standing into the Storm about our 18-year journey into the agricultural business. And that book includes our quality standard and why. So with the two of us standing here, you have 100% of the company.
I think it's important to say that some of the things we'll cover today, some will be familiar, some will be new, and we're excited to get going.
In the next 17 minutes, we're going to attempt to bring together all of the elements that we know of that go into the cost of meat quality, or the cost of quality, so you can get a sense for the large scale of this and what it implies.
Okay, so first, a basic definition of quality. Acceptable product quality means certain standards are met. In this talk, we're going to discuss Lindner bison's quality. Simply put, our standards, that is, it must be safe, humanely produced, natural for the environment, wonderful flavor, and its production must align with our core values.
Now, this quality standard is for Lindner bison. Other companies may have other standards. Now, what we mean by the cost of quality, this is a kind of a tricky term. It is actually a term that originated in the 1930s. And most people think when you talk about the cost of quality, what you're talking about is how much money do you have to spend to get a good quality product? Well, unfortunately, the opposite is true. The cost of quality is how much money is spent when a product fails to achieve good quality. Whether it's a widget or food or anything else, the cost of quality is an industry tool for measuring the cost of product failure. These failure costs are normally measured in tangible dollars, and we'll give examples of those in a minute. But first, we're going to describe the three areas of effort in the COQ, or cost of quality.
Okay. The three areas are, as you can see, prevention, detection, and corrective action. Now we'll get into some details.
Prevention is where you always want to be, and it's the least expensive place to reduce your cost of quality. If it's done correctly, any corrective actions that you've taken typically don't have to be repeated. Detection involves inspection and testing. That's where most people think of with quality. This is to find bad product and remove it before it gets to the customer. It gets more expensive. Corrective action is the most expensive area and what most companies want to avoid. An example would be in the meat business, product recalls and maybe some litigation. Initial steps for corrective action typically look for the source of what the problem is, and you have to keep going back and back and back until you find the actual root cause of the problem. Once you've found that root cause, then you can take appropriate corrective action. Quality professionals know that unless the problem is corrected at the root cause, it will recur.
Okay. So as a result of the 1993 Jack in the Box tragedy where 4 children died and hundreds were sickened by E.coli, the government worked with the meat industry to create strict new safety regulations for food.
3 years later, out in 1996, the final rule for HACCP was issued dealing with pathogen reduction. Now, HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. The HACCP committee originally wanted to impose these preventive actions at the meat producer or the pre-harvest level, but was forced to impose it at the meat processing level instead. So across the nation, both large and small meat processors had to review their systems, find out where the critical points were, and put some kind of controls in to find failing product.
The result was threefold. First, most of the meat production system confined animal feeding operations, also known as CAFOs or feedlots. That was bypassed. Many small meat producers couldn't afford to meet the new requirements. They went out of business. That's why we were hearing from Tara. There's just a real shortage still today. Meat recalls continued, some massive.
From a cost of quality standpoint, excluding animal husbandry puts enormous pressure on detection, which is inspection and test. And it's been my experience in the past that using inspection or testing in any kind of industry will only find bad product about 80% of the time. And of course, when meat inspection is being done, they never sample at 100%. So it's pretty obvious to see that at least 20% of the problems may escape detection.
So this may help explain why the meat recalls continue. It's also why we're told to cook to a certain temperature. That way, any bacteria that may have escaped detection and harmful will be killed. Now, it also reduces industrial meat's exposure to higher cost of quality. In other words, customers are made responsible for prevention.
Now, for years, scientists have made strong case for the root cause of certain harmful bacteria to be the industrial food lot system. A good example is the work done by James Russell of Cornell University. In 1998, Dr. Russell found that putting feedlot cattle back on grass for as little as 5 days greatly reduced harmful E.coli. You can see how happy these guys look. They know they've nailed it. Now that we know where the acid-resistant or E.coli are coming from, we can control them in a relatively inexpensive change in diet. This strategy has the potential to control the production of other acid-resistant bacteria, even ones that have not yet been evolved. Unfortunately, this finding was generally ignored. Instead, by focusing detection efforts at meat processing level, the root cause was neglected. And of course, as we already know, when the root cause is neglected, the problem will repeat.
Okay. So Lindner bison is different. When our quality efforts stop at prevention, but when we first started creating our own quality standards, we were reading about the meat recalls, which unfortunately in 2010 included bison. These animals, 80% of them are in feedlots. So, but we looked more closely at what we were doing and what those experiencing the recalls were doing. We found that recalls primarily seem to come from industrial meat processing plants, processing grain-fed animals.
HACCP regulations stress detection over prevention. Now, to us, that is a Band-Aid approach. So let's recap a little. If corrective action is so expensive, and if industrial meat production systems may contribute to failed product, why don't you go and prevent the problem at the origin?
So to understand why, we need to look at a typical cattle or feedlot system. Cattle is centralized. A centralized operation involves relatively few people, the least land cost possible, and their efficiencies as a result are high, costs are low compared to feeding bales of hay, grass hay, which we do. Cattle feeds like corn and soy are compact, easy to store and deliver, and the feed is subsidized by taxpayers.
As non-subsidized producers, we really appreciate the efficiency of CAFOs. When you can raise thousands of animals on the same amount of land that may only support 100 grass-fed, when that feed is subsidized by the taxpayers, and when the inspection is also paid for by the taxpayers, obviously their profit margin greatly exceeds ours.
So this is why big meat continues to operate the way it does. It's just highly profitable. Other government programs that contribute to this cheap commercial meat would include the low-cost BLM land leases. Conservation dollars into the billions are let for air and water pollution, wind and soil erosion, and toxic runoff, all byproducts of industrial food systems.
So as long as corporate profits are high and government supports continue, industry can see this very high cost of their product failure as an acceptable part of doing business. This high cost of quality may seem acceptable when you're only looking at intangible costs. So let's look a little bit closer at what we consider tangible costs.
Okay, so here we've got the tangible dollars, the cost of quality. Under prevention, the government estimates that it spends $1.73 billion just to implement HACCP alone, that's annually. Under detection, the meat inspection budget is for this year alone is over $1 billion. And then there's corrective action.
Now we get into the fun part, recalls. USDA reports the average recall cost between $4 and $5 million. Last year there were 22 of these, so we got about $100 million worth of recalls last year. So if you take that with all the other costs we talked about, it's real easy to get to an estimate of about $2.5 billion annually for tangible cost of quality. But when you look at the sales of the big four down there on the bottom of the right of this slide, 2.5 billion looks like kind of a small number.
So, and then now we move into the hidden costs of industrial food. You know, gratefully today they're less hidden thanks to the work of Michael Pollan, Joe Robinson, Joel Salatin. There are more all the time. Though excluded from most food industry cost of quality dollars, most agree they're every bit as important as the tangible costs. Now we divide the hidden costs of quality into two areas. It's indirect and intangible.
Indirect costs of quality, you can see some of what we think is a part of that. There's health, there's environmental impacts, there's biological, ecological impacts, and finally, what we consider important enough to be all by itself, loss of genetic diversity. Now, an example in healthcare, if you look at the slide, in Michael Pollan's book, In Defense of Food, you can see that even over the last 50-year period, we pay 8% less for food, but at the same time, we're paying 11% more for healthcare.
Okay, then now we're into environmental hazardous waste sites associated with CAFOs. This may look familiar to you. Also, the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, overuse of chemical fertilizers have created this. It's 3,300 square miles and reported is still growing, comes from Canada all the way down, picks up 31 states worth of these chemicals. Then there's global warming. Feeding ruminants grain, corn, soy, this produces more methane, which of course contributes to global warming or global warming, depending on the source.
Biological, we're seeing the serious diseases leading to unprecedented decline of pollinators like bats and honeybees. And the ecological side, we're really concerned about genetically modified crops. You know, those lead to increased use of agrochemicals, and we think that will cause unforeseen harmful effects in the future.
The loss of genetic diversity is disturbing. There's monocropping, cloning, patenting. Loss of this diversity among plant and animal species may have long-term negative effects.
And lastly, we include what we call intangible costs of quality. And these can't be measured in dollars, yet we all know they exist. How about the human death and suffering by people who have been sickened? How about the impact to their families and their loved ones? How about the suffering of the animals in the feedlots and while being commercially processed? And how about the decline of public trust in meat in general because of all of this?
A strong case could be made that the impact of these indirect and intangible costs may impact humanity far greater and exceed any monetary amount ever before reported.
Now this is where humanely raised meats from 100% grass-fed ruminants, such as ourselves, comes in. Yet we are not doing anything special or complicated. All we're doing is following nature's quality system, starting with the soil and the grass. We use nature as our prevention to eliminate potentially non-conforming product.
So nature's quality system also aligns with our core values. Our bison live a species-specific life dictated by their natural instincts. We provide water, grass, and fencing. We define grass-fed, no corn, no grain, no chemicals, no drugs, no feedlots. Animals remain in their family groups, no age separation of cows and bulls, no forced weaning.
We provide humane treatment from birth to process with minimal handling. We bless each animal. We honor the gifts of each animal by using everything possible so nothing is wasted. And finally, we use small family meat processors. They take the time to get the job right because their livelihood depends on it, just like ours does.
Now, some say there isn't enough land for grass-fed bison ranching. We disagree. If the 172 million acres of subsidized corn and soy were available, and 80 to 98% of that is grown for animal feed, there would be plenty of grassland for the animals to move through, and plenty of jobs for people who want to work.
And we do need new farmers. The ratio of older farmers like ourselves reaching retirement age compared to new farmers coming in is 60 to 1. So in 10 years, where will the food come from? China? Wall Street? Land developers? I think maybe the community gardens are the answer to that.
So, and then some will say that this work is just too hard. You know, to that we say, is obesity easy? Is heart disease easy? Diabetes, death? This is the reality. They are making double white caskets, and this does not need to happen. So what we are doing is not only hard, but impossible. We are insisting that a broken food system fix itself. Here are just a few examples of that system.
Yeah. In 2009, the USDA and the National Cattlemen's Association published a report entitled Diet, E.coli 0157H7 and Cattle, a 10-year review. You can see up here, what was their review? Well, when cattle were abruptly switched from a high-grain diet to an all-hay diet, total E. coli populations declined 1,000-fold within 5 days. And after all that, they say, oh well, but however, switching all feedlot cattle in the U.S. from grain-based diets to hay is just not practical. At the same time, in 2011, the CDC estimated that there are about 61 deaths in this country of E. coli every year. That means that since 1998, when the root cause and its solution was discovered, there have been about 793 preventable deaths.
2 months ago, when the government announced testing for 6 new E. coli strains, we read the delays were a result of hard lobbying by the meat industry. No surprise there, really. Cargill, in particular, though, was repeatedly wanting more time so it could perfect its new E. coli vaccine for cattle. Yet another example of a Band-Aid on a broken system.
And a way to make money. Meanwhile, portable hydroponic grass is being grown. It can be grown in 6 to 10 days to replace grain for livestock, and people who are doing it report very good results, and they also report it's less expensive than corn or hay. So there are other options available if the system really wants to fix itself.
Others may ask, just like the fish guy, you know, how can we feed the world? We hear it, and our response to that is indeed very similar to his. How can we feed the world if we can't safely feed ourselves? We believe that first we need how to learn to feed ourselves, one garden at a time, one
small farmer at a time, that's right. And then we can teach others how to feed themselves. Now, Lindner Bison's cost of quality does stop at prevention. We're very proud of that. The industrial food system, with its $2.5 billion budget, is not only unreliable, but indirect and intangible costs are morally unsustainable.
So, we believe to get a better answer, we just have to ask a better question. Rather than budget and measure failed food quality, maybe we should ask, how do we budget for good food quality?
The sustainable answer includes intangible as well as tangible.
The sustainable answer includes caring. Caring for humans and other species that we can see, and those that are too small to see.
The sustainable answer defines success not in dollars, but in expressions of helpful joy that surround us all and accomplish the home that we share.
So, what is the cost of good food quality? Well, it just depends. How big is your heart?